So if everybody, no, this is not on. How does this work? Check, check. Yeah. So if you'd like to grab a coffee, Dessert Square, we'll be starting the debate in 1 minute. Is that over? Is that a thing? No, 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 no.
Good afternoon, everybody. Oh, that was a bit loud.
Okay.
I'd like to acknowledge that we are gathered here today within the traditional lands of the Matagami and Matachewan First Nations and the land of the Mishikwag people in Treaty 9 region. I would also like to acknowledge the Timmins Council of the Métis Nation of Ontario. Hello, and welcome to Meet the Candidates Federal Business Debate, hosted by your chamber. My name is Val Veneri. I'm the president of the Chamber and general manager of James Toyota. The Chamber is an apolitical group, nonprofit organization dedicated to creating opportunities for business. Advocating on behalf, the Chamber strives to ensure that Timmins and Northern Ontario remain in strong economic health. As such, we are pleased to present our members with the opportunity to hear from the candidates on business issues of key concern. While business is doing a part to make Canada more prosperous for the people, the federal government has a role to play. That is why the commitments of each of the federal parties make during this fall's federal election will be critical. No organization understands this better than your chamber. Closer collaboration between the government and business will benefit both sides. Timmins businesses are among Northern Ontario's biggest brand ambassadors, and we trust that today's debate will provide insight in how the candidates propose we return to Main Street Canada and ensure that our business community has the tools we need to succeed. The Chamber believes firmly that your vote should be an educated one, and this is an important opportunity to ask the questions that matter to you, the business community. At this time, I'd like to acknowledge the presence of His Worship, Mayor George Peary and Councillor Noella Ronaldo. Thank you for joining us today. I would also like to thank Timmins, Cochrane, and Timiskaming District Association of Realtors for sponsoring today's event. Their organization represents 115 realtors, many of who are members of the Chamber and provide service to and set standards for their members while offering professional support. I would like to invite Michelle Blais, broker of Realty Networks Incorporated and president of the Timmins, Cochrane, and Timiskaming District Association of Realtors to provide some opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Val. The Timmins, Cochrane, and Timiskaming Districts Association of Realtors is proud to take part in the federal election debate for the Timmins-James Bay Electoral District. Across Canada and in the Timmins-James Bay riding, realtors advocate in promoting housing affordability for Hudson and Harris Townships to the communities up the James Bay coast. Realtors are key members of these communities. We see people in these communities, like several other fellow Canadians, struggle to find housing that is both adequate and affordable. Some wish to achieve home ownership, but can't due to the lack of availability of supply and home prices rising to increasingly unaffordable levels. Realtors have been working to make housing affordability a top priority so that we can help our clients achieve their dream of home ownership. Regardless of the outcome of the election, we are eager to help our communities with recommendations on how to make the dream of home ownership attainable for more Canadians. Canada's lack of housing supply is the reason why homes are becoming increasingly unaffordable. We believe this problem could be addressed by tying federal funding for infrastructure projects to the creation of new housing. In this way, when provinces and municipalities receive these fundings, they would be incentivized to create additional housing supply. Homeownership has also been made unattainable due to some new mortgage rules. Restrictions such as mortgage stress test were meant to protect the housing market, but they have pushed borrowers to less regulated lenders that offer higher interest rates. These rules must be re-examined to fix unintended consequences to ensure Canadians can get homes of their choosing. Also, potential first-time home buyers also need a little bit of help to afford their first home purchase. Increasing the first-time home buyers plan to $2,500 would help compensate for some of these costs. Also, the 30-year mortgage amortization period for first-time home buyers could also help to be considered to help with housing affordability, as it would have lower costs of monthly mortgage payments. Thank you, and best wishes to the candidates.
Thank you, Michelle, and the Timmins, Cochrane, and Timiskaming District Association of Realtors for partnering with the Chamber for this important event. Please join me in welcoming this afternoon's bilingual moderator, Cheryl St. Amour, who will oversee today's debate.
A little taller than I am. Good afternoon. My name is Cheryl St. Amour, and I'll serve as a moderator for these proceedings. I'd like to thank you for joining us this afternoon and ask that you be as quiet as possible to allow everyone to hear the candidates clearly. I would also like to thank Mark Rogers of Near North Video for providing our live stream that is being shared across the region. Your participating candidates for Member of Parliament are, in alphabetical order as per their last name, Charlie Angus, New Democratic Party, Michel Boileau, Liberal Party of Canada, Kramer Grenke, Conservative Party of Canada, and Renaud Roy, People's Party of Canada. The Chamber extended an invitation to Max Kennedy of the Green Party of Canada. However, he was unable to attend today. All candidates have been advised of the time limits, which are as follows. Each candidate will be allowed a 3-minute opening statement, with the order having previously been determined by a random draw. Candidates will also be permitted a 2-minute closing statement to occur in reverse order from the opening statement. Answering questions will rotate as per the opening, and candidates will have 1 minute to respond to questions. The other candidates will then be given 30 seconds for a response, though some additional open debate may be permitted at my discretion. Keitha Robson, sitting up here in the front, Chamber CAO, will notify candidates when their time is expiring. To steer candidates to strategies that help Timmins to grow and thrive, the Chamber Network's Vote Prosperity platform will highlight the questions being asked today. We will also be asking written questions submitted by today's audience. Please note that due to time constraints, we will only be accepting written questions from the audience during the first 20 minutes of the debate, and as such, not all questions will be able to be asked. If your question has not been asked, I'm sure that the candidates will be happy to meet with you one-on-one after the debate to answer your questions. Should you have a specific question you would like answered, you may write it on a piece of paper that was offered to you as you came in and submit it to the Chamber staff. I'll just point out some of the Chamber staff. We have Cameron and Carmen at the back. So you can give those questions to them, and then they will funnel those to me. Vous pouvez soumettre vos questions en français et en anglais. If you didn't pick up a piece of paper as you came in, we'll be happy to provide you one now, if you need one. Okay. Please be sure to submit questions that are pertinent to all candidates. Before we begin, please turn off your cell phone ringer or set it to vibrate, or we will be accepting a $100 donation. Wow, $100, good for you. Inflation. Yeah, to the Chamber's 100 People Who Care campaign. Reminder that emergency exits are located at my right and at the back of the room, and restrooms are located to my right, through the doors and down the stairs. I would like to thank each candidate for participating, and with that, I'd like to ask our candidate to present their opening statement. Due to the results of the random draw, Mr. Angus will begin first, followed by Monsieur Roy, Madame Boileau, and Mr. Grenke. I will start right now with Charlie Angus.
Well, thank you. It's an honor to be here as a former two-time director of the Chamber in Tri-Town. I only wish for today that we could have invited some of those extraordinary young students who led the climate change march in Timmins last Friday. Young people around the north and around the world who are leaving the schools and stepping out on the streets because they believe that their parents' generation, the business class, and political leaders have failed them. That we're condemning this generation to lesser opportunities and potentially catastrophic climate change. We need to say, my friends, that we're there with you, that our generation understands that we're not going to defend a 20th century economy, that the 21st century economy is about sustainability. So how do we do that? Well, the New Democratic Party has established a new Green Deal, which the Parliamentary Budget Officer said will create 300,000 new jobs. Unfortunately, Andrew Scheer said he's going to scrap the clean fuel standards for automobiles. I mean, this generation doesn't need those kind of Doug Ford and Donald Trump tactics because the issues that we're facing are profound. You know, I think of our Prime Minister coming up here last week and using the beautiful Northland as a backdrop for a canoe photo, and then he said he'd give $1,200 so people could go camping. The disconnect with what we're dealing with is so staggering because we have people camping every night in Timmins. It's called homelessness. Over 2,000 people homeless in this city. Those numbers would have been unimaginable 10 years ago. And no matter how hard our amazing organizations, our churches, our volunteers are working, we're dealing with larger systemic issues. The need to have the federal government at the table on affordability. That's why the New Democrats will establish a national housing plan. Because we need to talk about investments now, about restoring the social fabric that has been frayed, the one that came after the Second World War, that gave us the middle class, that gave us opportunity and hope. And when I talk about hope, I look at Northern Ontario in a world of uncertainty. The openness, the inclusion, us together, Francophone, Anglophone, Indigenous, immigrant, to be able to invite people here to work, to make sure our young people don't have to leave, to diversify the new economies that are growing in agriculture and research and climate science, and to establish FedNor as a standalone agency. My friends, this next Parliament, we're going to have profound questions, and I believe we may be in a minority situation. You're going to want someone who's got the experience, someone who knows how to work across party lines to get things done, someone to be your voice. I'm really honored to be here. I'm really looking forward to taking your questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Angus. Monsieur Roy?
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank the Chamber for organizing this event, and I want to thank all of you here for your interest in the future of Canada. A federal election is always serves as a good opportune time to assess the past, evaluate the present, and make a determination about the future that we want. My name is Renaud Roy, and I was born and raised in Iroquois Falls. I lived there practically all my life, except for a period of approximately 15 years, which I spent in the country of Romania. Prior to my charitable work in Romania, I was employed by the town of Iroquois Falls for 13 years. Now I work for Cochrane District Social Services Administration Board since November 2012. Running for political office was certainly not on my bucket list, to be honest, but I was actually looking forward to retiring in the very near future. However, the serious transformation of the political landscape and the effects it has on the social fabric of our Western society compels me to raise my voice along with those of many other Canadians and who say, wait a minute, what are we doing to ourselves here? Before we attempt to answer your questions and your concerns, I would like all of us to keep a backdrop of information constantly before us. Some of you might be familiar with the Taxpayers Federation debt clock. That thing has a particular way of injecting a dose of reality to our thinking. It is definitely sobering, if nothing else. At this very moment, our national debt is at $695 billion. Yes, that's billion with a B. We are now paying an astounding $27 billion a year in interest payments. To put this exorbitant number in perspective, this is approximately the equivalent to the combined salaries of all the doctors there are in Canada. Or it is even a lot more than what Ottawa spends on Aboriginal programs each year. Just imagine for a moment what we could do and accomplish with $27 billion. Imagine the freedom to tackle some of the things that are dear to our hearts. Make no mistake about it, debt is a form of bondage, and it will dictate to us what we can, but especially what we cannot do. Prime Minister Trudeau thought that budget balanced themselves and had promised a balanced budget by this year. But he and the Liberal government actually added another $80 billion since coming into power. I read an article recently in the Journal de Montréal, and that article mentioned the sum total of election promises that were made within the 18 first days of the campaign. Are you ready for this? More than $114 billion in election promises. I sincerely hope with all my heart that Canadians are seeing through all of this. Otherwise, we are in trouble. Thank you.
And now call upon Michelle Boileau to give her opening remarks.
Merci, bonjour, Huache. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today, to be among community leaders and engaged citizens. I get the sense that, like me, everyone here can appreciate the importance of this coming federal election. Our country and the world, quite frankly, are facing momentous issues. And Canadians will have to decide if we will continue to move forward or if we're going to go back on the good progress that was made in the last 4 years. Personally, I'm finally feeling like I'm starting to recognize my country again. But I think that we can all agree that there is more work to be done. And for us here in Timmins James Bay, I think it's time. It's time to move forward too, and with a new voice. So why should you elect me to represent the riding? Not only because I was born and raised here and because I have the qualifications, but because I've spent my career working on the ground throughout Northern Ontario, getting to know firsthand the region and its peoples. As Regional Director for Contact North, Contact Nord, I've been working directly with community organizations, grassroots organizations, small and medium businesses throughout northeastern Ontario, from New Liskeard to Chapleau, from Timmins up to the James Bay coast, and in every community in between. I know our riding, and I know that we deserve our fair share. And what do I mean by that? I mean things like our fair share of investment and government incentives to meet the growing needs of our businesses and our people, our fair share of training opportunities and programs, and even just our access to our fair share of the skilled talent pool. Again, there's been some real progress made nationally in recent years, and it's been relevant for Timmins James Bay too. I mean, over 8,000 of our families and something like 16,000 children right here within the riding are benefiting today from the Canada Child Benefit. We saw the appointment of a dedicated Minister of Rural Economic Development, which is so important for our region. We've seen significant investments made in aging infrastructure. We introduced Canada's first national housing strategy. And we had the first government to take demonstrated actions towards reconciliation with our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation peoples. My vision for Timmins James Bay is to attract research, innovation, and more investments to promote economic development in our region, especially in our natural resources sectors, yes, but also in new and upcoming sectors like agriculture, agri-food, and ecotourism. We have a lot to be proud of here, and I would like to see our resilience and our hard work be rewarded with growth and job creation. For me, it has nothing to do with partisanship. It's about meeting our needs now. It's about continuing my work with our communities. So on October 21st, we have an important choice to make. We can choose a status quo, or we can choose a seat at the table with a new voice for Timmins James Bay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Opening remarks from Mr. Grenke.
Thank you. I first like to thank the Chamber for putting on this event. It's always looked forward to by a lot of people, and to thank Mark Rogers for ensuring that the people that can't be here with us today, that is broadcast to them. My name is Kramer Grenke. I was born here in Timmins, proudly to say so. Everywhere I've gone, I've been happy to say that I was born in Timmins, James Bay, and to know that people respect this region beyond a doubt, no matter where you go, is quite humbling to know when you leave home. I've been involved very heavily in the community since my return here in Timmins. Very fortunate to say that I sit on the hospital board and the police services. Currently on leave from the Chamber, but watching from afar the continued work that they do, and with their rebranding process, to have the vision to move forward with a new brand to ensure businesses in our communities thrive moving forward. The biggest reason I chose to run and to be a voice for the North is that we've been left behind. For too long, our region has not been able to get ahead, and that's exactly what our government under the leadership of Andrew Scheer wants to do. Is we want to get ahead. We want to put money back into the pockets of normal Canadian citizens just like you and I. Andrew Scheer comes from humble upbringings, much the same as my own. He grew up in a townhouse with his parents, and they didn't have a car. We were fortunate enough to have so, and that's the type of person that wants to lead our country, someone that understands the struggles of a middle-class family, that understands the struggles of a small business community, that has to work hard to ensure that they can provide for their families, but not even that they can ensure the doors are stayed open for the people that they employ. We don't have big business here in Timmins. Our business is small business, and we rely on people like you and people that are watching and people of the Chamber that are directly impacted by the things that happen at the federal government level. We look at the costs to businesses over the last government that has had issues. You look at the carbon tax. Yes, we are dealing with an environmental problem throughout the world, but that is a world issue. That is not just a Canadian issue. We have to fight climate change on the world stage. Adding the price to a liter of gas doesn't make us stop driving to work every day. You still have to be able to drive to Kid Creek, Lakeshore, Goldcorp, or down the street to no matter where you work. Adding those without a solution doesn't help anybody get ahead at that point. We've seen issues with small business personal tax and dividends and things like that. And I've traveled every corner of the riding now as of last night. I've been to all four corners of the riding and heard many things the same, that it's time for change here in the North. We need a strong voice in Ottawa on the government side. I was able to hear something from one of our constituents. You know, they are worried about climate change, but they're more worried about the end of the month than currently the end of the world. And that's where they seem to be standing at this point. So I thank you for this opportunity and look forward to the questions today.
Thank you, Mr. Granke. So as I indicated, we will be pulling random questions from this bowl. So the first question, Monsieur Renaud will start with the first response, and he will have 1 minute, and then the other candidates will have 30 seconds. So the first question is, climate change continues to threaten the seasonal transportation infrastructure. How will you advance work with industry stakeholders and Indigenous communities to determine the full impact of climate change on their transportation infrastructure and subsequently advance economic development? That's a mouthful. You have 1 minute to answer that.
Well, one thing that right now we know that the federal government is giving and supporting with $21 billion towards the work of Indigenous people in Canada. And we want to make sure that that money is, because even with the last, since when we look back, we don't see any real development for the better for them. And so we need to really, taking all of these factors into consideration, we need to reevaluate how that money is being invested with the Indigenous community. Yeah.
All right. Michelle Boileau.
Thank you. With 30 seconds, I would say that one of the things we would have to look at seriously would be working with Indigenous communities that are looking to be relocated and to really advance files on the relocation of certain communities. But especially, it would be a question of working with, as we said, community stakeholders from within the transportation industry. So I'm thinking of Ontario Northland Railway, and I'm thinking of our airlines that are flying up the coast. We need that to be more affordable to be able to get around, and we need that our service schedules to be more representative of what the realities in the communities are.
Thank you, Mr. Granke. No, his mic's not working.
Now does it work? There we go. So this question actually fits perfectly into the last 5 days of my journey. I was up the James Bay coast the last 5 days. On Friday, I had the opportunity to talk to grade 5 class, and they spoke to two of the issues inside this question. Grade 5, you're 10 years old. They were able to identify that, you know what, they need the infrastructure for, you know, the all-season road to ensure, you know, they're talking about food viability and the price of food at the northern store. So through economic development and working, you know, with the stakeholders to ensure that that road can be built is exactly what all community members need at this point.
Charlie Angus.
Thank you. Well, I've worked extensively with Mishkegawak on establishing the permanent road that we need. We need the relocation in Kashechewan, which we signed the agreement in 2005. The government walked away from. We need to get that relocated. We need to stop the cuts to the polar bear that Doug Ford has launched against the Polar Bear Express. It's going to damage the viability of our northern communities. And finally, we have to stop building crappy infrastructure in the northern communities. The crappy housing, the substandard infrastructure that begins to fall apart as soon as it's built. We need to start working with the communities on sustainable infrastructure.
Thank you. The next question will begin with Michelle Boileau. How will your party present a concrete plan with timelines to return the federal books to balance?
Thank you. Of course, there's an interest in returning our books to balance, I think, from everyone within the country. We can't forget that when the Liberal government was elected 4 years ago, we were taking over from a Conservative government that had been in place for 2 terms prior. And so, though there was a hope to be able to balance the books by 2019, there was a lot more work to be done, I think, than what was expected. And so we've seen immense investments and advancements in social files and portfolios. We've seen investments in housing and in public transportation and transit. And so there was a lot that was needed, and there's a lot that is still needed for, as Mr. Angus mentioned, for the economy of the 21st century. And once we get to a point where that economy is sustainable, then definitely we'll be looking at balancing the books. But of course, we want to keep moving forward with the good work and the progress that has been done. The economy is in good shape, and so it's just a matter of time. Thank you.
Mr. Grinke?
Thank you. I mean, that's ultimately it. We in your own household, you don't spend more than what you have. We have to live within our means at this point, moving forward with our government, and start taking care of our own. We've seen that come out in the policy from Andrew Scheer lately to offset aid that's going to other countries. That aid, we have issues here at home. We've talked about that at this table and every other table. We have issues that need to be addressed here at home, and unfortunately, we have to live within our means and and stop spending more than what we have. The current projection with the Liberal government coming out the other day, $27 billion of debt added next year alone.
Mr. Angus?
Well, certainly we've seen a shifting of the debt, and a massive shifting. So students are coming out with $40,000 and $100,000 with debt, and that is a crushing debt. The fact that the federal government raised $3 billion off student interest loans in profit just in the last 4 years, that's a staggering debt. So we need to start talking about what debt is and how we're going to reinvest. We need to be reinvesting in municipalities, because as the debt has shifted, municipalities are having to raise costs more and more. Then we can start talking about returning the balance in the books, but the social books are completely out of whack right now.
Mr. Roy?
Very clear timeline concerning balancing the book. We will balance the books within 2 years, because as I mentioned before, $27 billion on interest payments alone is not acceptable. And that chips away at what we can do and with our money elsewhere and for other needs that are more pressing. So we need to be responsible, we need to be accountable. We should never spend beyond our means. So we will balance those books within 2 years.
Thank you. The next question will start with Mr. Grinke. Housing supply continues to be a significant issue in many markets across the country. What do you feel the federal government should do to help with housing supply issues?
All right, perfect, thank you. I appreciate the question. This is a prevalent issue. I mean, as we look to expand our markets here in the north, and we look for new industry, we have to ensure that the housing and the supports are with those that want to move here. And I think that's a prime example where we have to ensure we're investing. And to Mr. Angus's point, where you need to invest in good infrastructure. You want people to have a good value on the piece of property and the building that they're investing into, and want to have the resale value down the road. So ensuring that we have those points in place moving forward, that the value can be attained, and to ensure that there are essentially enough housing availability for people moving here is essentially where we need to move to.
Thank you. Mr. Angus?
Well, as we said, we need to get a national housing program. Unfortunately, the Liberal government housing program, they put in less money than the previous Conservatives. We need to double the first-time homeowner credit. We need to allow for the 30-year mortgages. We have to take the HST off new housing starts so that we can kickstart investment and make it easier for people to get units. But we need to start putting new housing projects on the ground, particularly in Timmins, where we see with seniors, with young families, and with Indigenous families as well.
Thank you. Mr. Roy?
40% of the immigrants coming to Canada get established in the cities of Toronto and Vancouver. So you can imagine that puts a very heavy load, and it limits the amount of housing available. For example, in Iroquois Falls, we have seniors that have actually invested. It's a nonprofit, it's a non-governmental organization, but it's working in cooperation with CDSAB. And I believe that we could establish a lot of these kind of things, but not be completely under the control of the government. Government should be a facilitator and not so much the provider.
Ms. Boileau?
Thank you. So as mentioned, we do have a national housing strategy that was just introduced, and so definitely it would be a question of maintaining that and continuing to build on that. Within the national housing strategy, we see a distinction-based approach for our First Nations, Inuit, and Métis Nation peoples. We also see additional investment on top of the $200.7 million that was invested back in the 2016 budget, additional investments on top of that for senior housing, and so to encourage the construction, renovation, and adaptation to make a senior housing more accessible. And so definitely there's a plan to add stock to housing stock. Thank you.
Thank you. The next question will start with Mr. Angus. There are labor shortages everywhere in Canada, requiring all levels of skill sets. As retirements continue to increase, workforce needs will become even more acute. How do you propose a well-designed, community-focused immigration policy that will help fill the gaps, providing businesses with the human resources they need?
Well, our region was built on immigration. That's how Timmins, we were the original multicultural society. We have a real opportunity now to bring more. I love the immigration pilot project. We need to make that permanent. We need to have programs in place, and we started this work with College Boreal and Northern College to start to bring up immigrant families with skills so that they can actually see the opportunities here. So one of the big issues is making us a welcoming community, to make families feel that this is an open, inclusive society where they want to be part of. And that is going to be also about putting training dollars and support for businesses so that they can hire, the training can go on, and we can retain people, because we certainly, to move forward in the 21st century in the Northern Ontario economy, the immigrant population, along with an educated young Indigenous workforce, will certainly help to transform our region, and certainly some of the work that we've been doing with the Northern colleges across this region.
Mr. Roy?
I lived in Romania 15 years, and I know many, many Romanians that have come to Canada, and for them it would be a dream to come and live there. And that's the state of affairs with many of even of these Eastern European countries. We are proposing to change the the point system when we do immigration, so that we could actually be proactive and basically sell the North even to these countries, so we can go out as a Canadian embassy and grant special points when people are ready to come and live up in our region here with the specific trades that we need.
Thank you. Ms. Boileau?
Thank you. So, of course, immigration will definitely be one of the many solutions that will help address our skills shortage here in the region. Of course, the rural and northern immigration pilot project is an excellent start, and I think that everyone here will agree that a pilot project is usually initiated with the hopes of it becoming permanent. And so I would definitely love to work at making that a permanent program here. It's a strategic, calculated approach to bringing newcomers to the region to answer the specific needs of our employers. And so definitely building on that, and of course also encouraging the entrepreneurship of immigrants in the region.
Thank you. Mr. Grenke?
I think the perfect example to look at it is that we know we have these skilled jobs coming up. We know that, you know, in the next 5 years or so we'll have 30,000 skilled job shortages. We know these jobs are available. We know people have the inclination to move there. I had one person tell me when I was down the road in Matheson one day, you know what, I can move here, I have a 6-figure job, do well. What are you going to do, and what are you going to continue to do for my family? And I think that's exactly where we need to look at this project as a whole, is that, you know, we need to have all these things together, encompassing, to have that community aspect, so when they get here, they continue to live here and want to stay here.
Thank you. I have a question from the floor. We'll begin with Monsieur Roy. The question is, in the event you are elected and your party is not, how will you ensure this riding will receive its fair share of federal funding and infrastructure projects? I can repeat it?
Yes, please.
Yep. In the event you are elected and your party is not, how will you ensure this riding will receive its fair share of federal funding and infrastructure projects?
What I get frustrated in seeing is that so much of our tax dollars here that we are paying to the north, from the north, are going to Ottawa, but we are not getting those tax dollars back into our riding. And so I would press and push that there would be fairness respected all across the board, and that they would look, because we are promoting equality and all that, so Northerners should be treated just like anyone else in other ridings, so that we get whatever we put in, we should also get something in return. So I would push very hard for that.
Thank you. Ms. Boileau?
Yes, of course. If elected and my party is not elected, I would look forward to being able to work with everyone in government. I've made a career in liaison and working in partnership with community organizations and with various stakeholders, and so I do have a demonstrated experience in that, and in taking a diplomatic approach and just essentially ensuring that the priorities, the needs, the realities of our communities in our riding are being heard. I'll do that by joining a consortium of other Liberal MPs in Northern Ontario, and so we could go with a united voice.
Thank you. Mr. Grenke?
I think that's just it. I mean, ultimately, there's two parties that have the biggest chance of forming government in any case at this point, and I have no reservations held if I'm elected and my leader is not at that point to work with the governing party to ensure that that political capital is gained. The North deserves it, and understanding that, unfortunately we are not on the governing side of power doesn't mean that we should be pushed aside and not given the time of day. We need to still have that voice and that strong voice in Ottawa.
Thank you. Mr. Angus?
I think I've been in this situation once or twice. In the last parliament, Timmins James Bay was the third highest in the country for the number of projects approved in terms of FedNor funding. We outdid Sudbury, Kenora, Sault Ste. Marie, Parry Sound. Why? Because we have great projects here. But the focus that I've been on is to establish and to push FedNor as an independent agency. We are the poor cousin. And unfortunately, the other two parties continue to support FedNor as under the industry minister. Every other regional economic development agency is standalone with a very clear budget. We have to continue to push to stop the cuts at FedNor and the underfunding so that FedNor can serve its job.
Thank you. The next question, we'll start with Ms. Boileau. Residents in Northern Ontario often feel like the South is favored over the North. How do you plan to represent the people and business interests of the North to ensure our continued viability?
That's a great question. It's something that I've lived every day in my career and had to face. I think that, of course, promoting the assets, the many assets that we have here up the North will be key, and putting those in the forefront. Since I've put my name in and decided to run as candidate, I've managed to, show to two different federal ministers what Timmins and area has to offer. And so I would hope to be able to continue doing that by being able to allow, our leaders to see firsthand what is going on the ground, but also bringing that to Ottawa. Again, I know this riding, I know the communities in and out, I know what we're living, I know who's doing what on the ground, and so I want to bring all of that to the different ministries, and I want to inform, the different files as they move forward. I think that I can actually present a northern perspective as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Grenke?
I think it ultimately comes down to, the North matters more than ever. Everything we pull out of the ground, the trees that we're harvesting, and the agriculture now more than ever, matters in the world because of the population growth. So, having a member on the government side essentially is what I'm running to be under the leadership of Andrew Scheer. And that's exactly how, we facilitate those conversations that, the North is here, the North is vibrant. We want the North to continue to grow, but we need the help of Ottawa, and we need that strong voice to continue to move forward.
Thank you. Mr. Angus?
Well, certainly the role of FedNor and augmenting that role so that we can diversify our markets. We have enormous opportunities with the growing agricultural fields that are happening here that really give us an advantage that we did not know we had 10 years ago. We need to be looking at that. The Indigenous opportunities. The greatest opportunity for growth economically in Canada is in Indigenous communities. It's why I've spent so much of my career trying to ensure we have proper education, proper infrastructure, because that will start to draw so much more attention from across this country about the potential in our region, that we all work together.
Thank you. Mr. Roy?
I believe that the federal government has too much power and too much money that it pools. And of course, we feel neglected because it's sending the money where there might be more votes to their benefit. We propose to lower the business taxes from 15% to 10%. So this would reduce the burden on small businesses here. And we also want to reduce the personal taxes so that basically we keep money right here in the north rather than sending it over there in Ottawa and them taking the decisions on what structures or projects they're going to support down there.
Thank you. We'll start the next question with Mr. Grenke, a question from the floor. What are you going to do to close funding gaps in Indigenous communities?
Good?
Yep.
Okay. That falls perfectly into, again, my last 5 days and having the conversations and understanding. Ultimately, it was my first trip to the James Bay Coast and visiting isolated First Nations communities. I used to work for the First Nations at the Waban Tribal Council, and I have a deep understanding of the types of projects and ensuring that those conversations are had. Ultimately, none of us can come in there with a plan and just say, this is the way it's got to be. It's having that initial conversation, understanding the funding gap that is being done. We're seeing health transformation in First Nation communities. We need to see infrastructure upgrades. We have issues going on in multiple different communities that need to be addressed as we move forward to ensure their success on the forefront.
Thank you. Charlie Angus.
Well, when I was elected, it was considered sad but perfectly normal that children get educated in squalid shacks and get sick, and it's not. And the work I've done has been to establish education as a fundamental right. We have done that. That water has to be a fundamental right. We are doing that. That we have to stop going along with governments that are fighting children. The Trudeau government was just found guilty of willfully and recklessly discriminating against First Nation children and has been fined $2 billion because children are dying in the child welfare system. And the work I've done in Parliament was to force them to close that gap, but they continue to prefer to fight with lawyers than to protect children.
Thank you,
we have
Mr.
to put
Angus.
children first.
Renaud Roy.
As I mentioned before, $21 billion is sent from Ottawa to different Aboriginal programs. We need to make sure that there's accountability for that money so that it's not going just to a few people, but that the needs of the general population are met. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the case of Charmaine. She actually had to fight her own band council because they would not open the books. They did not want to be transparent with the books. So we need to have policies in place and respect the law so that not just the band councils, but that every single citizen on those reserves profit.
Thank you. Michel Boileau.
Thank you. Of course, the Liberal government has a plan to continue to work towards on the path of reconciliation, and to close the gaps with better services. The first thing to do would be to ensure an acceptable level of connectivity in these communities. We have a plan by 2030 to make sure that all Canadians have access to high-speed internet, and that will be a first step to ensure that the quality services are being provided in the community. But essentially, we're going forward with a distinction-based approach, and so it's having those conversations with each community to determine what their distinct community needs and how we could achieve it.
Thank you. The next question will start with Mr. Angus. The adoption of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples will contradict the federal government's objective of one project, one assessment. How will your party plan to develop a comprehensive strategy to engage business and provincial or territorial governments to support expectations and role of industry?
Well, we've learned in Northern Ontario that we work with Indigenous communities. That's how projects move forward. For Andrew Scheer to say his government will not be held hostage by an interest group is not on. That's not how we move forward. We, in our region, have recognized to move forward with projects, whether it's the new projects coming on in Kirkland Lake or going to be in the Ring of Fire, that we do it with Indigenous people. And yes, the UN Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People is a fundamental principle that Canadians need to support. That's how we move forward in the 21st century. That's where we need to go as a nation. We are not going backwards, and the Indigenous people will not sit back and let us go backwards.
Thank you, Monsieur Roy.
I think that one of the issues that need to be addressed is that First Nations living on reserves should have the right to own where they live. So I think that we need to work in cooperation so that they can actually own property, and for businesses to own the property, because that holds back and even scares people because they know that they cannot own the land that they live on. Also, we want to, together in consultation, we would like to abolish the paternalistic Indian Act to give more freedom to natives so that they're not dictated from top down from Ottawa.
Thank you. Ms. Boileau?
I would also agree that the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous People is vital for our society. There is an unfortunate legacy in our country that we are working towards correcting. And I would say that we do have a plan in our platform to support strong Indigenous economies, provide funding for entrepreneurial activities, ensure that there are training opportunities, and engaging in both, our provincial and territorial governments, but also with the private sector. We've seen excellent examples of such initiatives here in Timmins, and so engaging our stakeholders to ensure that the proper training is provided so that our Indigenous population can fully partake. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Granke.
Thank you. Myself and under the leadership of Andrew Shearer are very much determined to work with Indigenous groups. Ultimately, personally, that was my last employer, and seeing the work that they do and ensure their viability is quite incredible. The bilateral conversation is exactly what is happening with the Ring of Fire to ensure that each First Nation is not left out, to have those conversations, to make sure that those conversations are heard, that the treaty rights are respected, and that we continue to work with First Nations group to ensure prosperity for all.
Thank you. Next question from the floor. We'll begin with Monsieur Renaud. What is your position on women's rights and gender equity issues?
That's very simple. To me, all Canadians, whatever race, ethnicity, color, gender, it makes no difference. Everybody is equal. And there should be no discrimination, at all between any Canadian. You're a Canadian, that's it. You're Canadian is a Canadian.
Thank you. Ms. Boileau?
Thank you. I can appreciate this question. I would say that the Liberal government definitely supports gender equity. Our 2018 budget was the first ever federal gender budget. So it took a focus on that, investing in childcare spots, investing in areas that will reduce barriers so that both women and men could have the same, have equal grounds in the professional world. I would also say on that the Liberal government applies a gender-based analysis plus framework to all decisions being made, to budgeting decisions, and so I would ensure that that continues so that we're considering those gender-based questions in all our decisions.
Thank you. Mr. Granke?
Can you read the question, please?
Yes. What is your position on women's rights and gender equity issues?
I think I very much agree with my two colleagues here. Ultimately we are all equal in this point. We have to ensure that those rights are maintained, that they're not hindered from, and to ensure that we can continue to move forward as an equal society.
Thank you. Mr. Angus?
Well, thank you so much. Certainly the question of a woman's right to choose is not going to be coming back up in Parliament on our watch, and we will make sure of that. We need to start putting more investments in supporting women who are at risk. In the northern communities, we know that very few services are in place. Women need to be able to work free, live free, and live free without violence. And we know in Timmins, the women's shelter and the women's organizations are doing amazing work, but we need to be there to work and to help them grow and do the work that needs to be so every family, every woman lives in comfort and peace.
Thank you. The next question will start with Ms. Boileau. Regional airports are vital assets for community development. Municipalities can't be expected to carry the burden of maintaining regional airports on their own. What do you believe should be done to ensure our network of airports remains safe and efficient?
Thank you for this question. It came up around our council table, actually. I'm a city councillor here in the city of Timmins, and I had to excuse myself from that motion, but I would have wholeheartedly supported a resolution to encourage increasing the funding formula that comes from the federal government for our municipal airports. I've seen firsthand, again, traveling throughout the region and going up to the coast, how important our airports are for our communities and for our region. And, funding coming from the federal federal government hasn't been increased in decades, and it is time for that. And again, it's having that strong voice with the northern perspective in Parliament that will be able to advocate for the importance of these airports. You know, they're essentially hospital departments because we're going through there for medical reasons. Our goods are being transported through there, and it's just too much of a burden on our municipalities, and especially when you're looking at situations like Moosonee, where, you know, they're in a very interesting situation where there's municipal funding, there's federal funding, but at this point, it's the municipality that's going to have to take on all the additional infrastructure, the capital costs for any work that'll be done in the future at the airport there, the much needed work, and so we do have to find a solution.
Kramer Granke.
Thank you for this question. I acknowledge that the general manager of the airport is here, Mr. Damon, as well. You know, it comes down to we're in an interesting predicament here in Timmins, where in 1999, when Transport Canada downloaded the airports onto the cities, we didn't create a non-for-profit. City Council operates through City Hall. The airport, you know, other cities have the opportunity to use it as a non-for-profit organization and apply for different funding options, but still receiving funding from the federal government and the municipality. So I think, you know, working with the city to ensure that that can be the possibility of becoming a much larger northern hub for regional transport is something that we have to look forward to on the airport front. Thank
you. Charlie Angus.
Well, this is a huge issue. I mean, you look at Kirkland Lake that's undergoing a massive boom, and yet we have an airport that the costs to maintain are very difficult because they don't have a carrier coming in. The CAP funding is failing northern and rural communities, and I have certainly worked with Liberal and Conservative rural MPs. Our problem is Bill Morneau, who's very much the finance minister of the 1%, doesn't seem to understand the importance of rural airports, and it's something we will be going back into this coming Parliament. We've got growing momentum on this issue to recognize we need to be able to put infrastructure in them because they are carrying so many other services that have become downloaded to the municipalities. There has to be a federal component.
Renaud Roy.
$5 billion are sent per year in foreign aid, and part of that is building infrastructures in Africa and Asia. These are tax dollars paid by Canadian citizens. I believe that those citizens have a right to be served. They have a right to expect something in return for the taxes that they pay. So I believe we should repatriate a lot of that money, and that would make a very big difference in maintaining or building even new infrastructures like the maintenance of airports in Canada.
Thank you. The next question comes from the floor. We'll begin with Mr. Granke. What is your position on the climate crisis? Will your party introduce policies that will impact businesses?
Thank you for the question from the floor. Ultimately, our government understands that, you know, a carbon tax that was supported by both the Liberals and the NDP at this point to ultimately just increase gas prices overnight, increase everyday options and everyday things that we purchase, and not have that money reinvested in the right spots ultimately hurt small business. You know, it comes down to, are you going to eat that cost? Are you going to pass it on to your consumer, or that cost goes back to the city and then goes back to the consumer again? So, you know, we look at things like that where we have to be investing in ourselves, green technology, investing in our homes, and understanding that, you know, all of a sudden we're not just going to be able to drive to work anymore. We still have to go about our everyday lives. Yes, we want to make sure we're as efficient as possible, but that comes down to, you know, 12% of emissions that are personal emissions come from our homes. How can we combat that where we know that, you know, we can still have, you know, a cost-effective base to receive tax credits to ensure that we invest in ourselves and invest in our homes without having the burden being put on small businesses and ultimately the consumer.
Thank you. Charlie Angus?
Well, how do we drop the personal emissions that are coming out of our house? Well, then we do a massive retrofit program. This will create the 300,000 jobs. Tax credits aren't going to get us out of the climate crisis, my friends, and business is already paying the price. And we look at Europe, who are moving ahead. We need a climate bank to start investing in new infrastructure and new alternate energies. I've been in Alberta with energy workers. They're retraining themselves. They're saying, where's the federal government? The opportunities are staring us in our face, and we continue to seem to be afraid of what we need to be doing.
Renaud Roy?
Businesses can know this for sure. The People's Party of Canada will not impose any new regulations to businesses in Canada for this. We will leave that up to the province if they want to do. Then they have the freedom to do that. But as a party, we have taken a stand on that we were not going to impose that extra burden on businesses.
Michel Boileau?
Thank you. It's estimated that by 2022, the clean technology industries will, profits will exceed $2.2 trillion. And so there is definitely an impact on businesses here. We decided that it shouldn't be free to pollute, and so we took action now. And that's the kind of action that we want to keep taking. Solutions that will make a difference right now. We will ban single-use plastics by 2021, creating new markets and new industries. And we want to protect 25% of Canada's land mass, which could include the Mishkegawak area, which I would really hope for. Incentives to retrofit our homes, but especially phasing out coal and planting trees. I called one of our local businesses. They were pleased to hear that we're investing $2 billion trees to be planted.
Thank you, Ms. Boileau. The next question will begin with Mr. Angus. Our taxes fund government programs and initiatives that contribute to making Canada the great country it is, and businesses are willing to pay their fair share. Canada needs to return to its place as a tax-competitive country for business by reforming the tax system to be fair, efficient, and modern. How will your party approach the Chamber's call for a Royal Commission on Taxation?
Well, I think that's a really excellent question because we are not keeping up with how businesses are changing, society is changing. Our tax codes really go back to the 1960s. But one of the big elephant in the room, my friends, is that around the world, the billionaire class are shipping more and more money offshore. What we're seeing in Canada is about $240 billion that's being held offshore. That's about $15 billion a year that are being lost. Local business pay their fair share because I deal with CRA issues all the time. What we need to do is to close those international tax loopholes like KPMG that set up an international tax fraud scheme for $130 million in the government. Let them go. All those tax frauders got off. If it was you or your business, you would have been held accountable. Once we close those tax loopholes and we start to look at what fair taxation looks like, I think we'll see a much better and a more just system, and we can start to reinvest in where we need to go as a society.
Thank you. Mr. Roy?
I believe that it's not fair to tax small businesses and then give large subsidies to big corporations. I was just reading yesterday, actually, in the comparison between Michigan and Ontario, how Michigan, being a manufacturing hub, has been outperforming Ontario, which is unusual because Ontario was always better at that. And some of the policy reforms that Michigan imposed there, they actually lowered business tax to 6% and cut regulations. And since then, they have been outperforming Ontario. Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Boileau?
Thank you. So I would agree that our industries are changing, the economy is changing, and so it might be time to look at a reform of the tax system. I must say that I was very encouraged with the Liberals' proposal to cut corporate taxes for clean technology and clean energy manufacturers in order to make Canada more competitive and more attractive to foreign business. And so, like I said, there is a movement. We are moving forward. We are looking. There's a demand for clean technologies and clean industries, and we want to help those industries come to Canada.
Mr. Granke?
I think it comes back to, taking care of our own, small businesses, what drives this country forward. I mean, as much as we wish, nobody in this room is a billionaire. But, when we look at putting money back into our pockets, and ultimately every small business owner knows that, the more money they make, they're not going to draw that out. They're just going to reinvest it back into their company. That's how they grow, and that's how they can ensure that they can grow for their community. So when we look at, looking at the tax system, that's definitely something to adhere to understand that the ever-changing market of small business and medium-sized business needs to change to ensure that our viability stays strong and moving forward.
Thank you. The next question will begin with Mr. Renaud. Our businesses are faced with a shrinking labor pool and an ever-widening skills gap. What plans will you put forth to attract, retain, and encourage a workforce that has the skills and training needed to help businesses succeed?
There are two things for sure that we can do. One is eliminate provincial trade barriers. because right now some provinces don't recognize the skills or the certifications from other provinces, and that should not be. We should be a united country, and there might be some people, for example, from Newfoundland that would be ready to come and work here, but skills and certification and training should be recognized Canada-wide. And then the second one is that we should specifically target people willing to come to Canada and sell the North and go recruit them, be proactive, not wait for them to come knocking at our door. We can go there because they are people that would be very happy to come and establish and get established here in our area.
Thank you. Ms. Boileau?
Thank you. So, of course, there's a need for training and a new way of delivering, a more flexible way of delivering our training, because there's going to be continuously going to be a need to retrain and upskill to be able to stay current with our markets. So definitely ensuring that we have the training opportunities here, ensuring that we're continuing to bring in the funding necessary to be able to provide youth with opportunities, internship programs, and the other thought I had there was also incentivizing our private sector and our stakeholders to put in place programs to support families as they're coming in, and so have spousal programs, and so making sure that there are incentives in place so that private industry is working towards this as well.
Thank you. Mr. Grenke?
I think that's it. We operate a lot on private industry up here, and the training part is we've reached a point where we all have become lifelong learners. I truly believe that, and many people can understand that. You know, you look at places like Northern College and Collège Boreal who really stepped up their game and understanding that, you know what, you have to ensure that the skills and the skills for the jobs that are available here in the North. So, you know, you look at those two institutions, and Université de Hearst, another example being from the North, and you know, it comes down to the family part of it, like mentioned before, where, you know what, I can come here and get a job. What are the supports available for my family to ensure that our viability here?
Thank you. Mr. Angus?
Well, thank you. You've already mentioned a number of things like the Immigration Pilot Project and other opportunities. I'd like to just talk a bit about some of the blockages. For one is EI, making sure that people can get the retraining. The student debt is causing huge problems for people who've already amassed debt and then are expected to get retrained for something else. If they're taking that on, that's really affecting them. In terms of immigration services here in the North, we need to be able to streamline and make it smoother to make us more inviting and to give us a competitive advantage, because as my colleague said, many people move to the cities. We have great opportunities with immigration here, but we need to be working to make sure that we are making the most of it with the federal government as our partner.
Thank you. The next question will begin with Ms. Boileau. Truck drivers are among the great shortage in Canada and can be felt here in the North. How will you work with key stakeholders to establish a process for applications for new and updated National Occupation Classification, or NOC code categories, to be registered in a timely fashion and include jobs like truck drivers as a skilled trade? A mouthful, right?
I'm going to read that
again.
again.
It comes down to we have a shortage of truck drivers. How are you going to help with that?
Of course, of course. So yes, I'm well aware of our shortage of truck drivers, especially having worked with Collège Boreal and having been part of the group that put together the trucking coach technician program and brought that into the community. And so during that process, we had worked and consulted with our local businesses that are being impacted by this shortage, and some great ideas came out of that. And one of the main things I think that we all have to keep in mind is that there's this fear, there's this negative connotation that we put to the trucks that are on the highways, but that's the only way we're bringing our goods in here. And so we have to make room on our highways for our transport trucks and ensure that we're not almost demonizing the truck drivers, but that we're supporting that industry, because that is really what is connecting us with the rest of the province. And so I had been part of a discussion about working on a consorted marketing and awareness campaign, both to sensitize our society to the trucks that are on the road, to make the occupation more attractive, and to encourage people to get into the industry. I'm familiar with the NOC classifications, having worked in employment. I'd be more than happy to work on that file.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grenke.
Ultimately, when you look at it, they keep our cities going as much as, we live here. They ensure that we can eat and we can shop and do all that, understanding that training is the main priority, and like said by one of my colleagues here, that, making it more enticing to do so, but ultimately safety is a priority at this point. You can't just put anybody behind the wheel of a rig at that point and understand, that they're going to do well on the road. But, they're a priority in the north. You said at the Highway 101, Highway 11 junction, you see the trucks that go by there on the Trans-Canada, and it's actually astounding to see that how vibrant we are with the trucking industry here in the north.
Thank you. Mr. Angus?
Let's talk about driver safety and training. I am not going to say I'm going to push as many drivers onto the road as we need when we see dangerous highway conditions. We need better training. We also need to say we need to get some of those trucks off the road. We have the ONTC. We have an enormous opportunity that has been underfunded year in, year out. So when we're going to talk about trucker safety, I want a national standard to make sure that people driving through on our highways are fully trained. And I'm not demonizing them. I see this day in, day out on the roads, some very dangerous conditions. We need to improve driver safety. We need to improve access on the rail so that we actually have some space on our roads.
Mr. Roy?
I think that I was just talking with the mayor not that long ago, and he was saying one of the problems is that for the older generation of truck drivers retiring, you basically need 2 people to replace them because they were willing to work so hard and so long, so many hours. I think we could go even straight to the high schools and start recruiting and presenting this as something that they don't have to study maybe 5 years to get their license. So, and again, immigration as well. I would go into immigration to replace the need that will be felt very shortly.
Thank you. So we're going to do the last question. It's the last question from the floor, and then we'll go into closing remarks. So last question, we'll start with Mr. Grenke. What makes you the right choice? Why should I vote for you over the other candidates?
That's it?
That's it.
Okay. Well, that's... Thank you to whoever wrote the question. I mean, ultimately, I was the opposite of what we call, sometimes out-migration. I love the North. From the day I left Timmins to pursue education and came back to the North, I knew I wanted to come home to Timmins, James Bay. This region is something special in my heart. There is so much opportunity here in the North. It's unbelievable, whether you look at industries that we have, industries that we can penetrate and open up here. Ultimately, I want to be, a strong voice in Ottawa, someone that wants to fight and work day in and day out to ensure that our goals are met here as a community. This isn't my plan. This is our plan to move forward. To be able to get ahead here in the North is exactly what needs to be done. For far too long, we've been behind the 8 ball, and we need to ensure that the voice that we have in Ottawa is, on the government side, to ensure that our prosperity here in the North will continue to grow and move forward.
Thank you. Charlie Angus?
Well, thank you so much. I think the real issue for us is that in Parliament you need someone with the experience who knows actually how to work Ottawa, how to work the committees, how to work both sides. I worked under minority governments, I worked under majority, I worked under Stephen Harper, I worked under Justin Trudeau. You can choose to have someone on the backbench, or you can choose someone who week in, month out, is recognized in Ottawa as one of the most effective voices in Parliament because I get things done, because I never lose sight of the ball.
Renaud Roy?
I think that Mr. Angus probably started also with at the bottom where he didn't have the experience, but he got the place that he is now because of his 15 years. So that can happen for any one of us at this table. But I think the main reason why people should vote for me is because a vote for me will be a vote for you. The reason I got involved in this race is that because government is overreaching on our freedoms, and I want to just basically give back the power to you within your hands. So that's what I'll be fighting for, to give you back the power.
Michelle Boileau?
Thank you. I think you should vote for me because it's time. I've been hearing it on the ground that it's time for a change, and I could be that right voice. I've often found myself in a room where I was the only person under the age of 35, where I was the only female, where I was the only linguistic minority, and yet I've still made it to the point where I'm sitting here in front of you. I think that I can represent those multiple voices at Parliament. I think that for too long, a lot of voices from our riding have not been heard and not been represented in Parliament, and so I would like to be the one to do that. I know our riding. I've traveled over 40,000 kilometers throughout the riding, getting to know the people. I know what's happening on the ground, and I want to bring that to Ottawa.
Thank you. I'd now like to ask the candidates to provide their 2-minute closing statements in reverse order from the opening statement. So we'll start with Kramer Grenke.
All right, ultimately, I mean, we have our work cut out for us. There's no doubt about that the North has struggled for a while, but we are vibrant beyond measure at this point. We've continued to be that strong group of people in the North that want to see results, and I believe that I can help facilitate those results in Ottawa. I have the chance to be on the governing side with Andrew Scheer. He has a great outlook for the North and for small rural communities just like ours to ensure that we are at the table, we are heard. So ultimately, we have that chance to have those conversations on the government side, or in worst case scenario, the opposition party moving forward, to be one of those two dominating forces in the House, have that strong voice during question period, building those relationships, ensuring that those conversations are had, whichever side of the aisle they're being had on, but those conversations are being had, that the government is committed to working with Timmins, James Bay. We have issues, climate change issues, social issues, infrastructure issues. We need those issues addressed here in the North. For too long, we have businesses that strive, that do well in FedNor funding. We need infrastructure money here in the North. We need innovation money that doesn't just, that comes at being a great part of the community beyond FedNor. We need options like that. Working together is, like I said before, this is our plan to move forward. This isn't my plan. I want to be your voice in that House, but I want the ideas to come from great people like you. Business community members, like I've said all day, are the backbone of our community. We don't have big business. Small business drives this community. You drive your employees to work. You have the ability to pay for them. You sponsor their hockey teams. You sponsor their dance academies. Those are the options, and those are the things that need to strive here in the North, and I will continue to fight for those day in and day out.
Thank you. Closing remarks from Ms. Boileau.
Sure. First, I'd like to thank the Timmins Chamber of Commerce for putting on this forum, for our gracious sponsors today, and to thank all of you for your questions, for listening, even those watching online. Honestly, though, I'm worried about what the future looks like. As Ontarians, we know too well what austerity could feel like. And that's why we need a federal government that can deliver practical, everyday solutions to move us forward now. In the last 4 years, our government has accomplished so much, but there is still a lot more work to be done. As a city councillor, I understand how we work with the other levels of government, and I know that a re-elected Liberal government would continue to work closely not only with the provinces and territories and First Nations, but would continue to work directly with municipalities. And I know how important that is, and you should all realize how important that is too. And I'm here because I want to be the liaison for that work, to ensure that we continue to invest in our communities and deliver better quality of life for our people, no matter where they live. And how will we do that? By building a strong middle class, by investing in healthcare and pharmacare, by ensuring a more secure retirement for our seniors. Also by continuing to invest in rural success, right? Building strong communities, creating more jobs. Definitely by ensuring that every Canadian has access to high-speed internet by 2030, because we here especially know that access to high-speed internet isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And finally, by investing in our future, by stepping up our fight against climate change and taking real measures to protect our natural environment. I think there's a lot to take away from the discussions that we had here today, but if there's one thing that I want to leave you with, it's that on October 21st, we have an opportunity. We have the opportunity to move forward together or be left behind. And so I want to move forward with you, and to do that, I need your support. So I'm Cheb Wado, and I'm hoping I'll have your vote. Miigwech. Merci.
Thank you. Closing remarks from Renaud Roy.
Everyone in this room is of incredible value. Why? Because you are unique. Among 7 billion people on the planet, there's not a single other person just like you. And I desire for you to prosper, to succeed, and to pursue your dreams. And here's my pledge to you if you find me trustworthy of this incredible charge, because I realize that this is no light matter. It is an incredible charge when you vote for somebody and you ask them to be your representative and your voice. So I will commit, this is what I will do for you. I will put everyday Canadians, regular Canadian, before elites at the top, before big corporations and before foreigners. I will put you first. I will fight to repatriate tax dollars that are sent from Northern Ontario, from our riding to Ottawa, but that are spent elsewhere. I will push back against top-down dictates from Ottawa and that correspond also to the erosion of our freedoms as individuals or families. I will work to limit the possibility of government and parties to make unrealistic election promises when they don't have the money to actually accomplish them. I will push to empower Canadians to determine their own path and their destiny, as well as secure the means for you to realize that and to fulfill that. I will hold politicians accountable and propose to cut the credit cards of those that are heaping debt on our own backs and on the back of our children and our grandchildren. 7, I will work to incentivize and facilitate the efforts of local residents and local organizations to be our brother's keepers in helping the most vulnerable in our midst, the elderly, the disabled, the poor, etc. And lastly, I will not play identity politics for this group or that group. I will not play vote pondering to special interest groups, which only create resentment between one another and pit Canadian against Canadian. So I would just trust your judgment and let you be the judge. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Closing remarks from Charlie Angus.
Well, thank you very much. And I want to thank especially my colleagues here. Because, you know, in politics, we're seeing a growing toxification of politics, a toxification in blame and personal attacks. And in the North, that's not how we do things. And this is our second debate together, and I'm really honored to be with people who understand that we're talking about our region, the North, who we are and how we move forward, because that's how we do things in the North. I see so much potential here. There's so many projects I'd like to undertake. I'm certainly been working behind the scenes trying to see if we can get an arts center here in Timmins, because we really need to build on our cultural opportunities, because if we're going to be a center that attracts people, we really need to step up our game and really invite people. You know, people say, well, why you, Charlie? They also say to me, gee, Charlie, you spent a lot of time helping all those First Nation people. That seems to be what you do. Well, I've heard that. I'm sure you've heard it. You know, when I went into the first community in Attawapiskat when I was elected, and I saw the squalid conditions in that school, and I was a school board trustee, and I said, how did your member of parliament stand for this? And they said, he never came here. And it was considered normal that children went to school in conditions like that. Well, it's not normal now, and it'll never be normal again. Why? Because we work together. I worked with young leaders like Shannon Kustashian and Chelsea Edwards, and we changed the fundamental discussion in this country, and we're not going back. That we changed the discussion about the child welfare system that has seen so many young people die on our watch just in the last few years. Because we cannot leave one part of our region behind. The young Indigenous population, and I'll make no apologies for the work that we do there, that is a future that is part of us, and together we are stronger. And I'm going to focus in this coming year now.
Thank you, Mr. Angus.
I just got started.
I know, sorry.
Thank you very much. Charlie
you.
Angus, first on the ballot, first in your heart.
All right, I'd like to thank all the candidates for participating today, and I'd like to invite Chamber President Val Veneri to provide closing comments.
First, I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the Donny Club for hosting this event. And thank you, Cheryl, for being the moderator. On behalf of the Chamber, I'd like to thank the candidates for participating in this event, and to you, the audience, for attending. It's important to hear about business issues, and in this election, we appreciate everyone has taken the time to be part of this conversation. I'd also like to present the candidates with a little gift from the Chamber. Should you wish to continue this conversation, the Chamber is hosting a candidates meet and greet on on October 17th at our member Surge Sports Lounge. This free evening event will provide voters with direct access to all the candidates. We invite you to visit our website or Facebook page for further details. The Chamber has launched an exciting new series entitled The Chamberhood. Having identified 8 different neighborhoods or chamberhoods within the city, the Chamber will be joined by the Mayor to gather neighboring businesses and create opportunities to network and gain insight on upcoming projects in that area. Clear your calendar. I would also like to remind you that October 20th to the 26th is Small Business Week. I encourage you to visit the Chamber's website where you'll find a calendar of events and workshops that will provide you with the tools you need to succeed. Special mention to our Workforce Summit, a unique sharing and professional development opportunity for employers, supervisors, and human resources professionals. This half-day summit includes a technology and services trade show. Finally, I invite you to stay and network and make the most out of this great crowd. To our media partners, I now provide you with the opportunity to speak with myself or the candidates for perspective on today's debate. Thank you again for attending, and be sure to vote on October 21st.